So I think we should talk about some westerns here.
Okay.
Because
Changing the subject.
changing the subject completely.
I'm your host, Sergio Angelini, and welcome to Tipping My Fedora, where we discuss movies, books, TV, radio, and much more besides, all from the darker side of the street. And welcome back for the second half of my conversation with Sheldon Hall, not only a lecturer at Sheffield Hallam University for 27 years, the author of several important books on film studies, but also the copy editor of my Film Noir encyclopedia, which is due out at the end of 2025, and as such he has more than a little bit invested in trying to keep me on track. I sent him an extremely long list of films that I hope to include in the encyclopedia, and here he explains why films from certain genres, like the Western, science fiction, not to mention a great number of films directed by Alfred Hitchcock, should perhaps not really be included. We don't entirely agree about this, but I really enjoyed the conversation and he's got a lot to say.
I've got a fair number of westerns in there, and I like the idea of Western noir, partly because there are some, I think, like Pursued. That you
Well, I was about to say
argue...
that Pursued, I think, is as clear as can be said, a noir western.
And a huge influence on Once Upon a Time in the West as well.
I will take your word for that. But it has many of the elements that we'd associate with noir, and it simply happens to be set out west. The flashback structure and the psychological depth to it.
And there's that nice continuity with sort of Anthony Mann and John Alton transferring their skills from noir to western, and so you go straight from one to the other.
And I think I'm right in saying that Blood on the Moon, which is another
Robert Wise,
another Robert Mitchum film from the same studio that's the following year, 48, I think, is also on your list. And I think I can see the point in that too.
Well, in fact, Alan K. Rhodey just wrote an entire book on that one.
Oh, there you go.
Okay. But yes, that's right.
However,
that's
yes, a lot of those westerns have a kind of dark aspect to them, and I think one of the earliest, if not the earliest, on your list is the Oxbow Incident.
Yes.
And I haven't revisited it very recently, but I'm a little doubtful about the noir element to it. Some of the other westerns that you include, I don't know quite why they're there, other than the fact that they are dark. At what point do dark films become film noir, I suppose, would be my question.
I think that's fair. I mean, one of the ones you immediately picked up on. I mean, there are others that I feel more strongly about, say Winchester 73, which was the first James Stewart, Anthony Mann Western, and
although not the first Anthony Mann Western.
No,
because it's preceded by Devil's Doorway, which is much bleaker than any of the
and it's
Stewart
John Alton
films.
as well,
yes,
and
indeed,
and is by rights much more of a noir, and that's definitely going to be in the book. I don't care what you say.
Okay.
That's going in there.
I'll let you have that one.
That one's been written. It's one of the entries that a friend of mine has written. I've not written it myself. Whereas something like Winchester 73, it has that sort of the intensity and the vibe and the essential narrative line is one that, the way we talk about in the 70s, shall we say, the Western turning into the urban thriller, the cop thriller. So that Don Siegel's sort of transitions via Coogan's Bluff into Dirty Harry. And so you kind of go from making Westerns to making police thriller, really the trajectory of Clint Eastwood rather than Don Siegel. But the idea that that's the way that, in box office terms, rather than aesthetic terms, and not a lot's changed. In that film, Winchester 73, although it's not shot in a particularly shadowy, dark way, oppressive way, there's that early part of the James Stewart darker persona. That's something that it's even in It's a Wonderful Life after all. So it's not that, and believe me, that there's going to be a podcast on Christmas Noir. So
I was about to say that there certainly are noir elements to It's a Wonderful Life, that night town and day town and so forth. Yes,
and I think it absolutely deserves to be in there in that part of the film.
It's part of the same world, I think.
Yeah, and so the fact that it coexists.
To 7 people, this gun was a magnet, a treasure, a weapon that promised life and dealt out death. For this saga of the West, Universal International has assembled a matchless cast. James Stewart, whose personal feud led to one of the grimmest manhunts ever filmed. Shelley Winters, trigger sharp and dangerous in her own way. Dan Duryea as vicious Waco Johnny Dean, who killed to get the gun. Stephen McNally, brutal, deadly, who wanted the rifle to slaughter men.
And one of the films that I think we both wanted to talk about, and we both realised that neither of us actually either seen it or seen it recently enough, was Whispering Smith, which was a film that Alan Ladd made as his first Western and his first film in colour. So it's a Technicolor Western, big expensive film. Paramount famously didn't have a Western set at the time. They used to use other people's, and I think they used to use Republic's, didn't they? So they built one for this one, and it stayed for decades, and it's where they shot Bonanza for TV and things like that. And they even built a railway track, and that got used, and so on and so forth. So
yes, I was struck by that. I was noticing the kinds of additions that only a major studio would be able to afford in a Western of this scale. Yes.
It's Ladd hitting a new high for excitement as the thundering conflicts of a great action novel plunge him into one thrilling adventure after another, tracking the night looters who blast the main line, riding for revenge against the marauders who terrorize the West.
But I realised, after you mentioned it, I thought I'd better rewatch this. I rewatched the early part of the film, which introduces us to the Alan Ladd character, who's called Whispering Smith because he walks slowly but with a big stick, sort of thing. So he's...
when he comes up behind you...
He comes up behind you and
whispers, you know who it is.
No, it's some person whispering. But it's little Alan Ladd. We get told this by his best friend, Robert Preston. That opening sequence where it's raining and it's dark and it's these 3 men who think they've killed the Alan Ladd character. They've not been successful, but sadly his horse has to be put down, which is probably the thing that would upset most viewers today, I would imagine. Then they go to the stop for the train and they kill the man who works there. And I earlier on was saying to you, the way it plays, and I'd remembered it in my mind, it's almost like the beginning of this Robert Schodmak version of The Killers, which is that they come into town and they kind of take things over, and visually that I think works. What's also true is that is not even the first reel, and after that it's a very basically conventional big budget Technicolor Western that focuses slightly oddly, but focuses on this friendship between these 2 old mates who used to bunk together. They've known each other for years. There is something very interesting going on about the Robert Preston character there. I think you watch it now and it feels coded as a romance, really. He sort of loves him, I think.
His greeting on seeing Smith for the first time is, "Hiya, sweetheart."
I know, and gives him a kiss.
And would you like to get out of this wet clothing? So, yes. I mean, it's... you don't have to look very far for a gay subtext.
It's not subtle, and yet this is very surprising. And then it becomes he married the girl that Alan Ladd also loved, and so it's that kind of the Butch Cassidy Sundance Kid thing where it's really a bromance, and the woman is a sort of conduit between one to the other almost. That's not entirely fair in terms of Butch and Sundance, but you can see why people might start to wonder about that, because the Brenda Marshall character, she's there a kind of moral alibi, but she's more of a I was gonna say beard. Well, okay, but fundamentally it's Preston goes bad, which isn't terribly successful, and in my mind I thought it was more intense as a psychological study of a character who seems nice and welcoming but who goes the wrong way. It's like Breaking Bad. You know, it's a character who goes wrong.
I don't disagree with any of that. All I would say is that it is absolutely conventional for a certain kind of Western subplot in which Robert Preston was more often than not cast in that kind of role as the hero's best friend who goes bad. There are plenty of other Westerns in the 1940s. Western Union is a similar sort of plot. It's not just confined to Robert Preston parts either. I mean, there is that plot of best friends who end up on opposite sides of the law is absolutely commonplace in the Western, but it's also absolutely commonplace in the urban crime film, whether it's a gangster film or a cop film. It's there in Angels with Dirty Faces. It's there in Cry of the City. It's there in a Western I watched just recently called Northwest Rangers, which is a B-movie of 1942, in which orphan boys are adopted by a Mountie, and one follows in his adoptive father's footsteps and becomes a Mountie, and the other becomes a gambler, and guess what happens? There is, that sort of plot, best friends on opposite sides of the law, is absolutely standard in that period, in the 30s, 40s, 50s. And I don't know that Whispering Smith, beyond that quasi-gay dimension to it, I don't know that the film adds an awful lot to it. And the fact that it could so easily be an urban crime film instead of a Western is marked by the fact that the Alan Ladd character is actually described at one point as a cop.
Yeah.
He's a railroad cop. You can transpose that entirely to a modern urban setting, change the iconography, don't build a Western set, just borrow Warner's
save about $1 million,
Chicago set or something. It's the same story.
Yeah.
And so the question we're asking is there a noir dimension to this? I don't know that there is. I mean, I take your point about the opening sequence having that very kind of striking quality because of the darkness and the rain and the three killers and so forth. Is that enough?
No, you've convinced me. It's coming out of the book. So no, job done, Sheldon. You're quite right. However, here's something that we're not going to agree about.
Okay.
One of the categories that I think you've pinpointed is the horror science fiction category as one that you think is potentially problematic when we talk about noir. I haven't included a lot of films of that type, but I have included two of the Val Lewton films, the most important one of which is The Seventh Victim, which is one of the few that doesn't actually, out of that cycle of 9 films, it's one of the few that doesn't have a genuine supernatural element to it. The other one's is really bedlam. But in that one, it's about people who are practicing witchcraft in modern-day New York. But it's a film about very dark, oppressive themes. It's really a film about suicide and about loneliness, urban despair. And I think it's a magnificent film. It's one of my favourite dark films of the era. So in that sense, it's a film that I would want to include in the book because it allows us to explore the milieu and the feelings of film noir. Certainly stylistically has the look of a film noir, directed by Mark Robson, without being... Sorry?
His first film, I think.
His first film, yeah. But very much not an obvious crime thriller. Absolutely not. And yet at the same time, because they could be Nazis, they could be spies, right? But instead, no, they're a satanic cult. They prey on the weak. Again, you change the you tweak it slightly, and it's Rosemary's Baby. But here, I find it a wholly remarkable film of its time, a beautifully made one. But that's just saying I think it's a good film. I just think that the style elements of it, the subject matter, make it... I suppose we have to use this phrase, perhaps noir adjacent. So that while it's not anybody's idea of an obvious film noir, because the femme fatale in this case is a woman who wants to commit suicide.
Sure.
So it's a literal fatal woman in that sense, but self-inflicted.
I think it does take us back to the point I made earlier about there being this current or set of currents in the 1940s. Which affect a number of different genres, both stylistically and thematically or tonally. It belongs with noir, even if narratively it doesn't. But I think that pessimism about society, about possibility of redemption and so forth, is a feature of even the pre-war wartime setting. Bizarrely, when you associate
depression
the war
era
with but the war era you tend to associate with escapist musical comedy, rather than that kind of depressive
and oppressive,
and paranoid atmosphere that is represented by The Seventh Victim and those other relatively early noir films that we're talking about, the crime films. But yes, it's part of that kind of countervailing tendency of that same period to somehow embrace or explore the dark
can I ask you, this may be overly specific, but a lot of textbooks and a lot of resources, shall we say, some online and so on, absolutely pick on Stranger on the Third Floor as being the first film noir in that sense. Now, I tend to push against that a little bit, but I've had a lot of people sort of say, no, it really is. To me, it feels still like a transitional film. It's played kind of as a horror film because it's got Peter Lorre very much in. He's not in it that much, actually, but he's there to kind of provide the horror impetus in terms of sales. So you position it that way. It has these dream stroke nightmare sequences that are they're filmed in the expressionistic style, but again, they're kind of Kafkaesque nightmares of guilt, and therefore fall within that accepted category, which is that nightmares tend to be shot in a certain sort of way. It's a thriller, almost a whodunit, except of course Peter Lorre did it. There's a big surprise. There would be a bigger surprise if we didn't do it, frankly. And it has a kinetic ending, and it has this person who's on trial. Of course, Elisha Cook Jr., the iconic noir character
the fall
actor.
guy to beat all four guys.
Yes. So there he is playing a fall guy who's going to go to jail for something he didn't do, and it's all very contrived, and it's a 60-minute film that's very quick. I am not necessarily convinced, but I put it in there because it's an important film to talk about, so I think it's going to be in the book. But, I mean, how do you feel about it being positioned as the first proper American film noir as we are supposed to understand that term? Are you convinced?
Well, I certainly do think it's a proto-noir because it in the same way that 2 Seconds, it anticipates that kind of doom-laden, paranoid quality of the noir period. Is it the first? I don't know. I'm very sceptical towards firsts generally. I think. I'm both drawn to firsts. I like to be able to nominate firsts. At the same time, I want to say, hang on a minute. How do we know? There's bound to be. If there's one, there's bound to be an earlier one.
I think you outgrow the idea that it has to be a first or a last of anything, right? Yeah. Really.
No, I would see it as, rather than trying to mark a starting point, I think we can talk about patterns of development and
so it's proto. It's not the first.
Things that anticipate.
Yeah, that's what I think. I think it's a stepping stone.
My question to you would be: if it's not the first proper one, what is the first proper one, or do you not recognise that as a question?
With the advantages of 80 years of hindsight, it would be nice to think that you could apply a reasonably flexible metric so that you could say if it hits X number of categories or elements, then you sort of say, well, I think you should consider it that way, because to not consider it is you're just being awkward. If we're going to talk about it, as fluid a term as film noir is, if we're not even prepared to commit to the idea that there are certain recognizable persistent elements, flexible though they may be, as occasionally abstract they might eventually turn out to be, we have to be able to recognize it when we see it. One of the things I'm talking about in the book is this idea of the famous definition of pornography that came out in America as a result of a court case brought against Louis Malle's second film, Les Amants, which it was prosecuted for obscenity in America. And the judge said, I can't define hardcore pornography, but I know it when I see it.
Yes.
And he then said, and this does not count. And this gives you some idea of, you watch Les Amants and you just think, what on earth are you talking about? There is a flash of nudity in silhouette that you can barely tell what's what. It's just this idea that it's a woman who has an affair and isn't sorry about it. Yeah. Well, which as we all should on a regular basis. But the point is that in terms of representation, it's not even remotely graphic. It's actually very pretty. It's very stylized. It's very romantic.
You know what's going on.
Well, only if you have eyes to see. But nobody's going to be corrupted by this. This is But that definition of pornography, which stuck for hardcore pornography, which stuck for a long time, is an amusing one to me, because I like the fact that it comes out of a film case. first and foremost.
So are we now applying it to film noir? I don't know. I can't define it, but I know it when I see
yes,
it.
it's
Right,
sort of
got
that
it.
idea.
Yes, got it.
So
Okay.
is that reasonable? I think, well, no, we should be able, particularly within film studies, to be a little more narrow than that.
We need a few criteria, a few tick boxes.
So, for instance, I would want to include the 1956 version of Invasions and the Body Snatchers.
Why?
Talking about Don Siegel, partly because those elements of paranoia, partly stylistically, I think there are some elements that fall within it.
But again, isn't that just a case of that the science fiction film shares, as part of its thematic, some elements of that are associated with noir? That paranoid element, which is true of a number of science fiction films in the 1950s, Invaders from Mars and others.
Well, partly it's the political dimension, partly, again, it's the doppelganger motif. But again, Invaders from Mars would be an obvious other example, people being taken over, and that predates it by 3 years.
No, you've got to get out of here, please!
They come from another world, spawned in the light years of space, unleashed to take over the bodies and souls of the people of our planet, bringing a new dimension in terror to the giant super scope screen.
It's whatever intelligence or instinct it is that can govern the forming of human flesh and blood out of thin air is fantastically powerful, beyond any comprehension.
A cursed, dreadful, malevolent thing was happening to those he loved.
This isn't just an ordinary body, is it?
I never saw one like it.
The reason I would pick on this one, partly it's because of the way that the narrative is a bit more open. One, it suspects that Siegel saw it originally as a kind of anti-communist sort of tract, and then probably rethought it years later and thought, you know what, this is not the prevailing wind in critical circles, and I'll change my discussion when these nice French critics come and talk to me about it. And, otherwise, what's the point of having a Siegel film?
Yeah.
I think that the way that it develops the characterization between the McCarthy and the Dana Winter character, and again, she's an interesting idea of she's not a femme fatale, and then she is a femme fatale when she isn't her anymore. This idea that you become a femme fatale. It doesn't have to be about alien invasion, after all. It can be about anything. It can be about conformity. And I suppose because of my own thesis about the development of the genre, the anti-conformity element that I ascribe to the kind of historical through line, I felt it jibed with that. And in terms of the visuals, in terms of the presentation, because there are some scenes that are shot very much in that style, and the doppelganger idea, which is one that I think does have a place within film noir, the idea that you simply, that you're having a breakdown of some kind. So that's why I included that. But I understand why one might want to question it, because you can see, as you say, it falls within all kinds of other films. Now, I'm going to leap forward slightly so that we can bring things to a happy conclusion in a perverse way. In the first edition of the Encyclopedia of Noir that Alan Silver and Orsini and Elizabeth Ward worked on, they have a whole section devoted to Hitchcock as being a problematic person in terms of noir. In auteurist terms, he's his own genre, he's his own master, and therefore to slot him in with a movement, a style, let alone whether you're prepared to call it a genre, it becomes problematic. So
Michael Walker makes a similar point here in discussing Hitchcock in relation to noir, that Hitchcock tends to be seminal in that he tends to make the first film of cycles that then become imitated by others. He makes those kind of big landmark movies like Rebecca and Spellbound as a psychological thriller and so forth. Psycho, obviously. And therefore he's not sui generis exactly, but he does stand to one side or above or whatever you want to call it, the genre, rather than being shaped by it in the way that, or being within the mainstream of it. Unlike other
I mean, I think that if you're looking to have a conversation about noir, to sort of exclude Shadow of a Doubt or Strangers on a Train or The Wrong Man or even I Confess seems perverse to me. They are examples of film noir wherever they're coming from. They are strong examples, even Notorious, just surely one of everybody's favourite films ever. You can absolutely say this falls within that category of films which a kind of suspense, melodramas, mostly shot in black and white with a very specific kind of style that deal with certain kinds of themes, and that brings it all under the film noir umbrella, which doesn't stop them being Hitchcock films. The first time I saw Hitchcock in the cinema was in that re-release in the mid-80s, when those 5 films that had been unavailable for quite a bit were given new 35mm prints. And the first one of those was Rear Window, which to me became this instant classic to me. I just thought, I've never seen it before. It's fantastic. I love it. I want to see this film forever and ever and ever. It was a wonderful print. It was in widescreen. I had never ever seen it like that before. And it was a wonderful experience. And I still feel that way. One of the ones I saw at the time, which I had much tougher time with in terms of, I'm not sure I get it, was Rope. Which is a film that everybody talks about for its technical innovation, or for its attempt at technical innovation, perhaps we should say, trying to present something as if it were a play in real time with very few cuts. Obviously the myth is that there are no cuts. There are in fact a number of specific cuts necessitated.
And recognisable cuts.
And recognisable cuts. They're hard cuts.
Not even disguised cuts.
Yeah, there are hard cuts, and they were necessary for certain real changes and so on. Otherwise you wouldn't have been able to keep it in focus. In other cases, though, it doesn't always work successfully, but it's also his first film in colour, which at the time meant gigantic 3-strip Technicolor cameras. So keeping it moving was all very difficult. So you hear all about the technical marvel of sets on wheels and rehearsing, and 10-minute takes, which isn't, none of them are actually 10 minutes, but they get close. And then you watch the film. What's the actual film about? You talked all about the making of it, but what's the film about? And it's a variation on the Leopold and Loeb story. It's a not particularly faithful, actually, adaptation of a play by Patrick Hamilton, who had written things like Hangover Square, which was...
And Gaslight.
And Gaslight, which are both... We're not going to argue the toss about whether those count as noirs or not, but they certainly fall within the Gothic melodrama idea, absolutely, and have their own virtues. This is a fairly loose adaptation. It goes back to the beginning. It's set in America now, and it's a real-time suspense film. Influential in a number of ways. Interesting also thematically for its discussion of Nietzschean ideas, but also, again, another gay romance at a time when this was not really being discussed in films very much, and it's not terribly coded this time, so it's something that you can actually really be presented with. And it seems to me that it should be a noir film. At the time, I didn't get it particularly. I found it unsatisfying. I didn't know what it was getting at. It's one of those films that's grown on me over the decades, because again, we're talking about that screening would have been 40 years ago, in Italian. I hasten to add as well, all dubbed. I've seen it many, many times since, and I'm now much more swayed by it. I find it much more successful, much richer experience. I'm much more interested in watching that because of, on the one hand, the way it foregrounds performance. Through these very, very long, elaborate, unbroken takes, it means that the actors aren't having all the editing and the cutting and the montage effects that you associate with Hitchcock, and to create states of mind in visual terms, but you're having to do it to a certain extent only through performance, although the camera is moving around and it's very, very specific, but nonetheless you get that unusual aspect of it. It doesn't all work, but it's hard to think, how do you not see it as a noir film, in the sense that it tells this incredibly bleak, dark story of murder where it's only been done as an experiment. You've extinguished a human life, which you see on screen in an uncomfortable detail, just so that they can get away with it, and then you see them over the next 80 minutes give themselves away and get caught. And
my response to that, your rhetorical question of how can you not see it as noir, is everything that is dark or bleak therefore noir?
Obviously not. I suppose...
Why obvious?
Again, well, in the sense that...
And if not obviously, why is this obviously noir?
Well, in the sense that you can make a film that way that can be presented in a very arid way, and there's no attempt at empathy, there's no connection with the audience, you're not speaking to any broader conversation, and it's not being presented stylistically in a way that goes along with the conventions of that approach. So it makes it harder to simply say, okay, look, it's a suspense film, but it doesn't really qualify as film noir, perhaps. Whereas with this one, it seems to me that because of the approach and the time that it came out, so it's released in 1948, more or less at the peak of cinema attendance in America, but also of film noir production, roughly, in the immediate post-war.
Mm-hmm.
1947 is probably the busiest year for film noir, but this is the year after. I just think that both the themes and the exploration of it, and visually, of course, it's presented in a different sort of way. It's only right at the end where you get an obvious kind of colour effect or a dramatic lighting effect, which is very striking, I think. There's something very interesting about colour noir. There aren't too many, but Leave It to Heaven and maybe Slightly Scarlet.
Yes.
They're two other obvious contenders. And this one sort of...
Or Rancho Notorious, described by Robin Wood as a noir western in colour.
Yeah, I'm not sure he's right about that. But nonetheless, and yes, and, Johnny Guitar, yeah, maybe.
It's on your list.
Yeah, it's on my list. It might not stay there. But I suppose it's just the way that it fully embraces the darkness of the theme, and because it's got James Stewart, who is really leaning into this very neurotic type of persona that he will adopt for a number of his films.
Well, I don't know that Stewart's character in Rope is neurotic.
I think by the end he's very, very troubled.
He's troubled. That doesn't make him neurotic.
No,
if anything, I think the Farley Granger character and the John Dahl character are neurotic in their different ways.
I think by the end, by the end, his world's fallen apart. What he believes.
Yes, he's been confronted with the implications of what he's said, and which he has taken as.
But I agree, he's utterly confident and not very pleasant through most of the film, and it's only as he starts to suspect the truth that I suppose it's that switching, that re-examination of darker impulses, that focus is what makes it interesting to me and unusual for films of the time, which seems to be part and parcel of certain films, like obviously They Drive By Night maybe, and Gun Crazy, and other sorts of films, and I suppose indirectly In a Lonely Place, films that will look at very, very dark personae and try to explore them in not without using the kind of cod psychology or something like Spellbound, but is going for something much tougher, much harder to explain, something where there's an ambiguity but also genuine ambivalence about what do you do about people like this. These are horrible things, and yet you get into sort of more serious kind of filmmaking. But there were kind of two films, and we'll finish up on this, I think. There's two James Stewart films, and obviously this is his first with Hitchcock, and his last is Vertigo. Now, Vertigo might be my favourite Hitchcock at this point in my life. I saw it with you in the new then 70mm. I was not happy about the new sound mix, but I was
likewise
bowled over by the 70mm realisation of the original VistaVision neg, and that's never left me. It's an extraordinary visual moment in my life. It's sort of 2 hours 8 minutes or whatever it is, and it's an extraordinary moment that we saw on very, very large screen, and that was a fantastic experience.
Where did we see that? Remind me.
That was at the museum in Bradford.
Okay.
As part of the widescreen weekend.
Yes, I will be seeing it again very shortly in 35mm. So there's a new 35mm print. Whether it will have the same sound mix, I don't.
Robin Baker of the BFI made a point of saying to me that it's the original soundtrack, not the new the remix.
So the original mono mix.
Yes,
good.
It's the original mono mix. He absolutely. I asked him specifically on Twitter. I refuse to call it X. I'm calling it Twitter. And Robin Baker of the British Film Institute made a point of saying no, the new print has the original mono soundtrack. Was it originally presented in Perspecta?
I don't think so. I think it was just straight
It
mono.
was just straight mono. Okay, so that sounds like a really good reason for seeing it.
Yeah.
So it's without the new sound effects. So Rope it's an experimental film about dark psychology and fits in as, again, this kind of Hitchcock sui generis idea, but it falls within certain categories of noir, and so it needs to be included in there somehow, I think. So I think it's just unusual enough and dark enough to warrant inclusion. Vertigo, which sort of comes at the tail end of what most people consider to be the classic period, along with Touch of Evil. I think it continues into about 65, 66, but a lot of people cut it off 58, 59, or maybe 60 with Psycho. Vertigo, it's a crime story. It's a private eye with psychological problems, a femme fatale, a doppelganger, extraordinary visual presentation of the film, although of course in colour. Seems to fall within certain parameters, sexual obsession, all that good stuff that you associate with film noir seems to cover this film as well.
What was the strange attraction that brought these two together, in spite of the dark forces that tore them apart? The specter from the past that drew her to the ancient headstone in the mission graveyard. The compulsion that drove her relentlessly to the point of no return. The story of a love so powerful it broke down all barriers between past and present, between life and death, between the golden girl in the dark tower and the tawdry redhead that he tried to remake in her image.
If I let you change me, will that do it? If I do what you tell me, will you love me?
Yes.
All right, then I'll do it. I don't care anymore about it.
You're not as convinced?
By Vertigo. Again, I just wonder if we need to define a film like Vertigo as noir as opposed to just being...
Well, in my case, it's about whether I include it in the book or not.
Yeah, well, yes, of course. I take you have a pragmatic dilemma in the sense: do I include it or do I not? Whereas the rest of us don't. We can just think of it as a Hitchcock film or a psychological thriller or bizarre sex melodrama, to use a phrase that was used to promote Marnie. Yeah, I take your point that it has some of those elements. The doppelganger as well. I mean, classically, more than Wonder Man does. But is it useful to think of it as noir? I think that would be my question. Does it actually tell us anything about it that is not immediately obvious from the thematic and material and the stylistic procedures that it follows? Does it add a dimension to link it to those earlier films of the 40s and early 50s that clearly are what you might want to call noir?
But why wouldn't you want to call it noir compared with those? I mean, just because it's Hitchcock? We back to that idea, really? That he somehow...
Because it's kind of... At the beginning, you asked me how I would define a noir. So I said relationship to that hard-boiled literary tradition, visual style, design, which involves chiaroscuro lighting and so forth, and a kind of a bleak worldview, shall we say, shall we put it that way, possibly paranoid worldview. And it has some of the latter, and I suppose I don't know about how the Boileau and Narcejac, is that how it's pronounced?
Yeah, Boileau and Narcejac.
Original novel relates to the hard-boiled tradition. Does that count as hard-boiled in French terms? I'm not sure about that.
No, their stories are too tricksy for that. They all rely on some kind of big trick.
Les Diaboliques, for instance.
Yeah,
is that noir or is that just gothic thriller?
Well, I think in the end, it's closer to noir than gothic because it's just a school. It's not particularly gothic otherwise. Whereas this one, because it has this otherworldly atmosphere, which is not in the book. I mean, the book is set... The book is different because the split in the narrative, which follows the murder sequence and the mental breakdown of Scotty Ferguson, the character played by James Stewart, and then an unspecified amount of time. I mean, I think we find out it's been 8 months or something, but, time has changed. In the book, it's actually, the first part of it more or less takes place during the war, the Second World War. And then it's years later because the war's over. And that actually is the reason why the husband character exits the narrative, because it's many years later and, the world has changed. So it has, on the one hand, that slightly more realistic element to it. Because in fact, in the book, he recognizes her from a newsreel at the cinema. He sees this woman who reminds him of this person he fell in love with, who was the wife of his old friend who died, who committed suicide, he thinks. And he sees this newsreel, and partly it's about how he managed to track her down. And then it becomes one of those stories that, oddly enough, has slightly more in common with Jim Thompson, even James Hadley Chase, actually. It's more hard-boiled in that respect, because it's about how they two get together, but she won't admit what really happened. I mean, the plot mechanics are the same. He doesn't quite understand it, and yet he knows something's going on, but his obsession overtakes the narrative. It's this horrible trap that they're in shall we say, in very French way. It focuses on this kind of almost Simenon like, this kind of horrible relationship they're now sort of trapped into, where they can't really communicate, they can't really be together, which is completely thrown away by Hitchcock in that regard, because it doesn't develop that side of it at all. For instance, if you read the novel of, say, Casino Royale, the last part of the book is all about how Bond and Vesper Lynd's relationship sort of falls apart when he realises that she's betrayed him. And they try to get past it, but they can't. So the passion is there, but then it slowly turns to horribleness. And that's something that happens in a lot of Jim Thompson books, as well, whether it's, The Grifters in actual fact, or The Getaway are bad examples. But to give you an idea of just how bad the relationships are, if you like, and those, you can sort of get that idea. So it's about that. So it's tougher and more based in a reality about people, even though the story is completely artificial, based on a kind of ridiculous trick that is there to surprise the reader, but which we all know in real life could not possibly work. And the Hitchcock movie, just leans into the ridiculousness of it. I think it's one of the things that makes it feel modern. It kind of says, yeah, sure, I'm going to go with it. None of there's some things that just don't make sense.
Yeah.
But it's a great film, and I think it's fair. And we wind up our conversation on film noir scepticism. It says, well, it can be a great film, and it can count as film noir. That doesn't have to make it great film noir necessarily. It can be great for other reasons. But equally, we can, just because you've ticked certain boxes, that means you'll get entry to the club, doesn't mean that you would want to go there to ruin the Groucho Marx line. I wouldn't want to be a member of a club that would have someone like me for a member. And I think, does that seem fair to you?
Fair enough. Yeah, I mean, my own reflection on noir is that I wonder if it has lost its descriptive usefulness, because it has been so widely applied to all kinds of films that are just contemporary with wartime and post-war period, and sometimes not even that, which dilutes any notion of it being something specific. If it's a bit bleak, it's a bit dark, it's film noir. If it's in black and white, it's film noir. If it's a crime story, it's film noir. Can we not just call them crime stories? Can we not just call them melodramas? Can we not just call them something else? So
we need to have a tighter definition of
noir.
We
either need some... We can even go back to those films that we haven't even talked about of the 1930s, the Carnet and Prévert French melodramas, which were called film noir in the 1930s, and maybe think about why they were called that, and what are the elements that carry through. But if we look just in relation to American films, at those original commentators in the mid-1940s who gave this term to a period of American filmmaking, which included, by the way, some films that don't get referred to as film noir any longer, as well as Double Indemnity, films like the Best Years of Our Lives are talked of as noir in that period by the same writers. Let's not go down that route particularly, but
we'll never get out of that rabbit hole.
I think maybe if we just retrace our steps a bit to what those original commentators meant when they were referring to film noir as being a characteristic of the American cinema that they were seeing, which was not just the films of 1946-47, but films that were coming through to France from the wartime period as well. And then maybe think really carefully about what it means to apply them to other films as well, and then we might have a more judicious and selective application of noir rather than the kind of blanket distribution of it to in any crime film in black and white, as I began by saying.
Well, on that note, Sheldon, and thank you for ruining about 50% of the entries for my projected book, but it will be the better for it.
It'll save you some time, believe me.
Thanks so much, mate. That's been brilliant.
Thank you.
You have been listening to Tipping My Fedora, the show about all things noir. It is produced for Castiglione Publishing by me, Sergio Angelini, and our theme tune is by Petar Milinkovic, whose work is available through Tailkeeper Music. All audio clips are the copyright of their respective owners, and used under fair dealing and fair use exceptions solely for the purposes of criticism and review. Please subscribe to Tipping My Fedora wherever you get your podcast fix. And it would be great if you could leave ratings and reviews about the show at Apple Podcasts. Be seeing you.